All right, today we're going to be talking about inverses. Now, inverses are basically like an undo function for a function. So if you've got a function that does something, the inverse function should basically undo that. So for example, if you're adding 5, the inverse function will subtract 5. If you're multiplying by 5, it's going to divide by 5. It undoes whatever the first function does. Now, we can see that here. F of g of x equals x. So that's a fancy way of saying if I do my g function to x, and then I do my f function to whatever that result is, it sends me back to my original input. Okay, so I go from my input to my output and back to my original input. Same thing here. If I do my f function and then my g function, the same thing happens. I just go back to what I originally had. So again, the inverse function, you can think of it as a way of undoing another function. Let's look at an example here. We'll start simple. So f of x is 2x, g of x is x divided by 2. Now this should make sense. The opposite of multiplying a value by 2 is dividing it by 2. So this g function undoes this f function, and this f function undoes this g function. Now, I did some ordered pairs here real quick, okay? So if you input these values, you get these values. Now, if you knew nothing else about this function, other than that it was the inverse, you could still figure out what it is by just treating it like an inverse. So I know that if I input -2, I get -4, which means here, if I input -4, I need to get back to my original, which was -2. I just switch my input and my output. So that's another really good way to think of inverses, as switching your x and y, switching your inputs and your outputs. If I input this to my function, I get this. And then if I input it to my inverse function, I'm back to where I started, because I've just switched my inputs and my outputs, my x's and my y's. So here I go. Again, I'm going to switch my x and y, switch my x and y, switch my x and y. And if you'll notice, that is the ordered pairs for this. Half of -4 is -2, half of -2 is -1, and so on. Okay, so that's how these inverses work. They're switching the input and the output. They're switching the x and y. Here's a slightly trickier example. Here I've got x to the third. Okay, now x to the third, make sure we can see all that. X to the third, I've got some ordered pairs here. Now, how do we undo taking x to the third power? Well, we can undo that with a cube root, or also x to the 1/3 power is actually the same thing. By the way, that will show up on your assignment, so make sure you know that cube root is the same as x to the 1/3. So again, if I want to take the inverse of this, all I've got to do is swap x and y. Okay, so if I do the cube root of -8, I get -2. If I do the cube root of -1, I get -1, and so on. Okay, so if you're given ordered pairs and you need to find what the inverse is, well, you just swap them. And if you're trying to come up with the domain and range, all you have to do is take the domain and range from the original and swap it, okay? Because domain is your inputs, range is your outputs. So for the inverse, it'll be swapped.